parts of the building that a significant portion of it seems to survive from the first period of development. Again, I just want to remind you, we have a center passage plan that goes through the building, and it seems that that was the plan from the get-go as far as we can tell. Closer examination of the stair over the summer shows that although it is primarily replacement material at the very top, there's evidence that it did in fact continue up to the top.
In this type.
Turning, yeah. So it didn't go through.
No, and that door is new at the landing, taking it into the back. That would not have been there.
That would make sense.
But it went all the way up, but that meant that the only way you got to the back rooms was through the front rooms, unless there was a back stair, and we don't know where there was a back stair. But it does appear, and this is a close examination of the evidence of the pins for where the newels and the balusters were, that shows that it continued to curve up to the upper story, which was interesting. I think often we assume that they really only go 2 stories rather than all the way up. So this is 20th century recollections of what happened was that the whole stair came out and a new stair came in, but in fact the stair went out and some of it came back and some of it was new. So, you know. In the other rooms, the majority of the finish you see what is that of the 1890s. But the big beams in the ceilings of each of the rooms are also evidence of the first period of construction.
That's about the only part that one sees that is early and part of the original structure in terms of what's visible.
And from what we could see when we looked into places of the building, the structure of the walls is the 1890s. And it is really the evidence that is against the surviving members in the ceilings where we can understand something about early iterations of the building. So the place we looked most closely is the kitchen, and I'll ask Byron to talk about that when we go in there. So we hemmed and hawed about whether we thought it had always been 2 rooms deep or whether it might have been one big room on either side. I think we couldn't find any particular evidence that it hadn't been 2 rooms. There were 2 chimneys. There were, you know, it didn't seem to make sense.
The room above is only a single fireplace is up above here, rather than 2 over 2.
Though there are 2 over 2.
This is 2 and then 1, and then more or less in the middle. So that could have then been a larger bedroom, the parlor bedroom, parlor chamber, which may have been larger and more formal reception type area.
But we couldn't see any evidence that would tell us that.
Yeah, we'd have to be intruding it through the ceiling, get a look at all that. Up there, that wasn't possible.
Right. We were able to look into the ceiling in the kitchen because of damage that had occurred in it. So we took advantage of that.
Sheetrock was on it, and we pulled the sheetrock off and gave us access in.
Right. And so obviously the whole east end fireplaces were reconstructed when that end was reconstructed. We think that probably the best surviving fireplace is the back one, but it's surviving from its iteration at the turn of the 18th to the 19th century, not 1683.
Carrie Carson thinks the lower courses of this curved back fireplace might be quite old. That's sort of his speculation.
Right. There is, you know, looking up the flues, there is fabric and assessment to be made, some of which we have begun. So if you have questions, you know, we're happy to answer them, but this is all Lawrence. And you'll see, and I'm just, you know, bring your attention to the fact that it's the same doors, the same trim, the same, you know, it's a very uniform. It's not what you would find in a house of the period where there would be variations from room to room and floor to floor.
Charming. Did they know we were coming?
They didn't know?
They did.
Yeah, so we need to speak to them. Yeah, so if you want to hear about the evidence in the kitchen, Myron is going to talk about that. Yeah. I herded them all, Myron, so you can talk about the kitchen.
Okay, okay. In the 1880s, on the drawings that you have there, you may have seen there was a pantry. You can see the partition here, partition scar. This space was divided off into a pantry. And when that was removed in the 20th century, whenever sheetrock was placed in there, so we could see, and on the floor, we could see that, you know, you can see, you know, there are some scars of patching in there, which match the scars in the ceiling in there. So it was clear that that's what we were seeing there. So we pulled down the sheetrock and were able to pull down the lath as well. And it was clear that the beams were whitewashed, and we could see up in the attic as well when we took up some floorboards that the tie beams up on the second floor, and then the summers here and these girts here above the level of the existing ceiling were whitewashed, and certainly below. And a number of floor joists had been reused that were pit sewn and whitewashed, but they were, at least in this space, there were only 2 or 3, and the rest were mostly new. And the walls, we took off the baseboards and were able to peek up underneath there. That was virtually all new material. But it was really interesting. We were able to get some sketches on the sort of the joist interval. And the evidence we found of the partition, what may have been an original room partition here, was where this tape is on these 2 beams. Up above that, there was a patch, a strip that wide with no whitewash, suggesting the partition wall that was there. We couldn't go all the way across to see whether it was there, but that was very clear that we had this. So there was certainly is evidence on these beams above the ceiling of some of the earlier partitions, and even later alterations. It was clear there were a whole series of nails, some still in place, and nail holes that held probably a plank partition wall that was nailed against this face of the beam. They were cut nails, machine cut nails, so this was clearly a 19th century partition, but we don't know where maybe the other partition was on the other side, the earlier partition on the other side of the beam. We couldn't get a look at that side, we couldn't say. But our main goal in that was just to see, is there the potential for new information still extant on some of the framing members that could give us that information, since the walls, the masonry walls were probably furred out, planked over before lath and plaster were applied to them, and that was all completely removed, probably because of its deterioration. Most of the framing members at different floor levels were removed, and the wall partitions were removed. So the only really thing that might give us the evidence is these. We also were able to sample through dendro into these members as well as the roof members, and so when we go up there, you'll see.
And so it revealed a plan that had a front room that was bigger than the back room,
Right.
which was in a sense what we expected more than the quite equal division that we find today.
It does beg the question, if the partition was here, was there a fireplace in this back space, or was it not heated at all, and just the front room would have been? And so there's a lot of questions that arise from all of this. And since that wall is virtually entirely rebuilt, we're not going to find it from the outside. So maybe looking at these beams, well, no, actually there isn't going to be a girt there, that's the entire brick wall. But maybe on the brick wall there might be some evidence for not a flue being there or a flue being there or something. So the potential is there.
But only for the early 19th century, because
Yeah,
the 1683 wall is gone.
it's gone to a large extent, or all of it, yeah, on this wall.
Who's done that? What's there?
He would have put a plug in.
Those are electricians.
Oh.
See, this is where the end of this has been
Yeah, that's
replaced. Yeah, no, it looks like it's breaking around the way. See, that goes much further.
Yeah,
That's this floorboard
right.
going past, and so we'd have to do an awful lot of demo there. See, we took some dendro here. Then, yeah, that's a plug.
These doors are all kind of standard.
Oh, I'll let somebody else get in there.
And then this door to this space is different from the doors to this space, you know, take individual. Different interior design. Different budget. And I think you kind of assume the same for that entrance. You know, this arch over here,
We don't know the age of these arches.
this arch over here looks like it was the other access to this brick up there.
Exactly.
It was a wider arch, and it makes sense from the documents about where people had access. And you can see you can't go all the way up.
It's a different stone. Yeah, pretty clear how different the stone is that's built in that gap.
Oh, yeah.
That's not heating the hot water, is it? Why wouldn't it's still going?
What do you think it's active?
It's the circulator pump for the
Oh,
heat.
okay. Even though the heat.
Yeah, I'm gonna tell him that he needs to.
I am, I'm
go
going
in.
there,
We're
I'm actually
gonna-
presenting.
Is it another van show?
Windows in the upper area, and you can see this is a different style of brick work.
The end
This
was
is also
rebuilt.
where those additions were constructed in the 1870s. They weren't here very long, actually. If we have dated the photos correctly, and that's a challenge, believe me, this kind of odd single-story section came out here, and then another section extended off the rear. It's that section, it's that material that when the building goes through that period of deterioration in the 1880s, is when those additions are on. The earliest photographs from the late 1860s or 1870s don't show those. Then they're there in the 80s, and then Lawrence does his work in around 1890, and these get taken off.
It's a one-story shed roofed addition. Comes out past the front of the building, goes around and then wraps around the back to a gable roofed L that comes
Right.
off the back of the building. So
And it
there's
has a
a
drive-through.
lot of a drive-through there.
Yeah.
Very utilitarian. We don't even know how it was used and what
Right.
it was used for, but it gave them a lot of space. It almost doubled the floor space.
You got into it through this door.
That's what the assumption is. There also was a period where there was a little shed covering this door earlier in the 20th century. This is separate from those 1880s additions.
This
So we kind
five-
of imagine that the drive
five
would just come in.
stretcher, one header bonding is
That-
really a common early 19th century interval, so we think that's when it was all
And
done.
I don't think we know when this access to the cellar was put in. I think we think the earliest one was in the front. The cellar does not go under the entire building, which is fairly common for early buildings.
You can see the scar for the gable roof L that came off the back.
Right.
And when that was on, this window was closed. Wasn't in the image. So it had been